What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's Talk with TheWeasle podcast, or just Let's Talk MMA. And Joe Rogan was talking about how MMA should change. He thinks the referee should not stand up fights, and if the round ends with the fighter on the ground, the next round should start on the ground as well. I get that he wants it to be like a natural fight, but it would kill the sport for any spectators. Like, who wants to watch that at the end of the day? Fans cater more to striking than anything else, and if a lot of fights are on the ground, they stay on the ground for a long time, next round begins on the ground as well, you will lose a lot of fans. Now, it would incentivize fighters to get better at getting back up to their feet, but I'd be down with that if you allow ground and knees, soccer kicks, maybe headbutts, heck, bring eye gouging, all that different stuff. If you want a natural fight, then just bring everything into it. Definitely ground and knees and soccer kicks, though. That would be a great way to finish the fight for both the wrestler and the striker if he's able to defend the takedowns or reverse. The wrestler gets a north-south and starts bringing down the knees. I mean, it could be a devastating position where right now north-south is like completely abandoned. But at the end of the day, they'll never do that. They'll never make it where the referee cannot stand the fight up. They need fans. They don't want to lose their audience, and that's what that would do. And did you guys hear the whole thing about Gegard Mousasi? Gegard has come out and said that the PFL is the worst organization he has ever fought for. Well, technically, he hasn't even fought for them yet, and he's been trying to get a fight, but they just won't talk to him. He's saying the reason why he left the UFC in the first place a while ago, he was a #1 contender, he was going to get a title shot, left all of that for Bellator, was because that Bellator was going to pay him more. But he said that he is getting paid more per fight, but he's given less fights than he was offered in the UFC. And he's saying it's so bad that he's been trying to talk to the PFL to get a fight for himself, and they're not even answering. Apparently, like, his manager told him that the PFL literally said they do not want to talk to Gegard Mousasi. Is that even allowed? I wonder if it's in the contract if they have to give him a certain number of fights a year. And Mousasi and his manager are saying that the PFL just doesn't have enough money to pay all these other fighters, especially the ones who are under contract with high payouts. That's a yikes, man, especially after what they just signed Francis Ngannou for. And now Gegard is even saying that he wants to take the PFL to court for not giving him fights. They've literally shelved him from making a living, and he's under contract where I would think he wouldn't be able to fight anywhere else. I could be wrong on that. Maybe he has like a unique special contract, but if it's like a normal one and Gegard's not allowed to fight anywhere else, that is super messed up. And this is a guy who fought in Bellator, the UFC, Strikeforce, Dream, and Pride, as well as many others like Deep and M1 and Rings. This guy's fought everywhere, man, and Gegard's a cool guy, man. If he's telling you that your organization sucks, it probably sucks. The guy's 38 years old. He wants to keep fighting. He wants his first PFL fight. He hasn't competed in a year. That is outrageous. I don't even know how that's happening. Could it be that the organization could shut down soon or something? I don't know why else they're not talking to Gegard. And if that's the case, how are they going to pay Francis Ngannou when he comes back and fights for them? What are they going to do there? I mean, that guy's going to make millions of dollars in every single one of his fights. If they can pay Francis, they can definitely pay Gegard. But paying all of them is probably the issue. Who knows, though? That's what Gegard is saying. He seems like a pretty standout guy. He's always been really cool. He's an absolute legend of the game. But I still wish he never left the UFC. I still wish we were able to see his fight with Robert Whittaker, Michael Bisping, a rematch with Jacare Souza, and against all the other top guys at the time back in 2017. It's weird, but maybe not as weird as the whole Khalil Rountree situation that's going on. So we're not going to see Bangkok ready. It's such a bummer. I mean, credit to Jamal Hill for taking the fight as well, but Khalil Rountree pulled out his fight with Jamal Hill because he implied he popped for PEDs and said that something must have happened. He thinks it was a tainted supplement because he popped for DHEA, which apparently is very common and even gets cut up with different kind of products. So it is believable that it was a tainted supplement. And the crazy thing about it is, I'm not an expert, but by itself, apparently it doesn't help that much. It's usually used with other PEDs. So what would they even do here? If they allow him to fight because he proves it's a tainted supplement, is that a regular thing they're going to have to do with everybody? But what if they still have it in their system, you know? So like, what do they do then? You know, they can't let him compete anymore. But DHEA, just from what I know, it doesn't really do much for you if you're not taking other stuff as well. Regardless, Khalil Rountree seems to be out of the fight. That UFC 303 card is in shambles. That thing is not looking great. Unless they could get Yuri Prochazka to jump in. What if Yuri jumped in and fought Jamal Hill on short notice? Yuri's a legend if he does it. He's a real samurai. But we'll see what happens. Maybe Ian Garry is on the card and he finally gets to go up against Colby Covington. I don't know why Colby is not fighting him. Colby versus Ian Garry has to be the fight. Like, that's the one that should happen. Colby's instead calling out Charles Oliveira, which is a fight I love. That fight could be a stylistic nightmare for Colby. So who knows if that fight's going to happen. I did not expect Colby to turn down anybody after losing to Leon like that. So Colby looks like he wants to sit on his ranking and fight someone else in another division. He wants to most likely fight Conor McGregor, I would only imagine so. He wants to fight Charles Oliveira. Maybe he's waiting for Dustin Poirier when he should be fighting someone like Ian Garry, Shavkat Rakhmonov, or Jack Della Maddalena. Those are the guys that Colby should be fighting right now. And the funny thing about Shavkat is no one is calling this guy out besides Jack. Jack Della is a real one for that. Nobody else wants to fight Shavkat. Even Leon came out and said after he beats Bilal Muhammad that he wants to fight Conor McGregor. Even Islam is calling out Conor after he beats Dustin. It's the Conor sweepstakes all over again, and a part of me really loves it, man. I like when Conor's back. I like when he's competing. He brings so much more life to the sport. But the only thing about it is everybody wants to fight him. Every champion around his weight class is willing to give a title shot to him, even though he hasn't won since he beat Donald Cerrone back in 2020. Okay, this is what's gotta happen. Leon versus Shavkat, or the winner of Shavkat and Jack Della Maddalena, Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. And if Conor beats Chandler, the fight is Maximus Holloway. There's no one else. Actually, Conor versus Oliveira would be pretty dope. But can you imagine how big Conor versus Maximus would be? That's the fight to make for the BMF title. Massive numbers, man. Second biggest pay-per-view of all time. Insane striking match. They got history together. A rivalry gets brewed up. They've been talking about fighting each other for years. I mean, remember all the who's the best boxer in the UFC debate between Conor and Max? They kept chirping at each other, taking shots. And what if somehow Conor won? Can you imagine if Conor beat Max, making his comeback after just knocking out Michael Chandler in devastating fashion? The sport would hit another McGregor wave. Like we're all the way back in 2015 again. And did you guys see the kick stream that Conor was on? I never expect him to have a stream, but he was talking about everybody. He was eviscerating Kamaru Usman, talking how Leon's so boring, no one cares. A decision fighter that's going to fight another decision fighter, and only 200 people are going to watch it. Said Ilya Topuria reminds him of Artem Lobov because of how dumb they are. And bro was ecstatic when the fans brought up the whole Khabib tax situation, and he's saying he hopes that Khabib comes back, because he would need money and they could go at it again. So after he went scorched earth on the entire UFC roster, he comes out and says that he's not going to trash talk like he used to anymore. He said it doesn't do anything for him and it's just a waste. It's for no reason. So what was that kick stream then? Dude, Conor's going to come in like Ryan Garcia. No training, coke and alcohol, while Michael Chandler's waking up 3 a.m. every day, throwing medicine balls around, eating healthy vegan diets, going to the gym 3 times a day, taking all of his quote-unquote supplements, being in the best shape possible. Conor comes in there all coked out and KOs him in the first round, taunts everybody, puts the world on fire in his interview, calls out Khabib, calls out Artem, calls out Diego again, Steven Espinoza, that fat girl in the club, the old man from the pub. He's going to be bringing everybody back. I can't wait for unhinged Conor McGregor in that post-fight interview. I still don't know why Conor went for that whale in the club. Must have been a slow Tuesday. But after all of it, Max Holloway is going to tweet. He's going to post something, say, let's fight each other. And here we go. Conor versus Max. But here's the question now. Does Max fight Topuria first? Knowing that Conor is fighting at the end of June, does he just wait it out? Because a bit of the steam will come out of that fight if Max loses to Topuria, right? That much is going to be true. Max is at the biggest of his entire career. He's never been more popular. He's never been more loved. This, I think, is a time for him to fight Conor McGregor. What would you do if you're in Max Holloway's position? I'd personally wait out for Conor. It's a multi-million-dollar fight. You're a BMF champion, so you can actually get pay-per-view points for this. It would be by far the biggest fight of your entire career, and nothing would even get close. And if he beats Conor, goes into the Ilya fight, it'd be another money fight. Max would be one of the biggest stars of the sport. If not, he would be the biggest if he beats Conor and then beats Topuria after. I would rather do all that instead of dropping down to 145 again, take up the tougher challenge against Topuria, potentially lose. There is a high probability he could lose that fight, and a lot of that gets cushioned. He could still fight Conor after, but it wouldn't be as big of a deal as it is right now. And heck, Topuria wants to go and fight Ortega. Fine, take my leftovers. Go fight Brian Ortega. I'm going to be headlining Madison Square Garden against Conor McGregor, the second biggest fight in UFC history. And bro, Ilya calling on Brian Ortega is such a random thing. I don't understand, other than him pulling off a power move against Max. Why would he double down on this? There's no other big fight Ilya can get, besides Conor of course, than fighting Max Holloway right now. what is Ortega to you? Like, that doesn't appeal to anybody. And honestly, if Conor fought Max, I don't know who would win. Stylistically, it does favor Conor McGregor, but the age that he's at, how long he's been out of competition, him not being the same guy as he was, you'd have to go with Max, who's gotten better, who's more powerful at the higher weight class. He could definitely knock you out at this point. Sitting on his punches much better than ever before. And technically, at the absolute bare minimum, he can compete with Conor. I'd probably go with Max Holloway, even if we see a good version out of Conor McGregor when he fights Michael Chandler. Another banger fight that could happen is Jose Aldo versus Dominick Cruz. I don't know why this fight didn't happen originally. Cruz said it was on the table, but I think he was injured or something like that, and instead Jose Aldo sunned Jonathan Martinez. Now Dominick Cruz is actually kind of calling him out. He's saying that him and Jose Aldo would be a fight that he would do, and he thinks he's a nightmare matchup for Jose Aldo, which is funny because I think, and I've thought this for a long time, ever since both guys were champions in their divisions, Jose Aldo is the absolute worst stylistic matchup for Dominick Cruz. In any division from 145 to 125, there is no one that's a worse matchup for Dominick Cruz than Jose Aldo. What does Cruz do to him? He can't take him down. His legs will get chopped to pieces. WEC Jose Aldo will be back into this game, kicking out those legs. With his movement being compromised, Dominick Cruz's boxing is not nearly as good. He's very, very hittable, and Jose Aldo would pick him apart. If Cruz starts dipping his head, he might eat a knee. Do you know how I imagine every single time Aldo hits Cruz? You guys remember the Mortal Kombat games with the X-ray moves? That's what every single strike hitting Dominick Cruz would look like. He leg kicks him, snaps his leg, breaks it all into pieces, shattering his entire shin bone, hits him with a left hook to the liver, ruptures it completely, there goes the ribs. Cruz dips his head, gets knee to the face, entire skull gets crushed. I was born with glass bones and paper skin. Every morning I break my legs. Every afternoon I break my arms. Can you imagine that guy taking shots from Jose Aldo? I do respect Dominick Cruz if he does take the fight though. I mean, they're both legends. Cruz still the greatest bantamweight of all time. Jose Aldo the greatest featherweight of all time. It would be a very nostalgic fight that I would appreciate very highly. I mean, for someone who saw both their entire careers in the UFC, and I saw Jose Aldo's career in WEC, this fight will bring a smile to all of our faces, man. I hope they do it. That's the fight to make. I know there's Henry Cejudo, but Cejudo's calling out Rob Font, actually, which is interesting. I do respect that call out. He's not looking for big money fights. He's not looking for, like, legendary fights or anything like that. He actually wants to fight other contenders that make sense for him. He just lost 2 times in a row, and now wants to go down to fight someone like Font. I wish more contenders understood their position and did the same thing, like Colby Covington. Right? I like Colby, but man, get a good win and then start calling out your opponents. Because now Ian Garry might go and fight Michael Page. Shavkat might fight Jack Della Maddalena. Then where's Colby going to be? Unless he's looking for money fights. This is why I said before that I think Colby has one foot out the door. I don't think he cares to fight other contenders and have some kind of longevity in his MMA career. At this point, I think he wants to get the biggest fights possible and then leave and do other stuff. And Ian Garry versus Michael Page is actually a pretty crazy fight. 2 6'3" strikers, the distance manipulation of MVP versus the fundamental textbook striking of Ian Garry. I think that could be a pretty close fight. I think MVP is going to be faster. I think he might hit harder punch for punch. His movement could be compromised by the leg kicks of Ian Garry, but at the same time, he could be open for those lunging punches. And Garry will drop that right hand when he's throwing his own left. And there could be other creative angles for MVP to take to catch someone like Ian Garry, who likes to stay to the fundamentals of everything, making it a lot harder of a target than, for an example, Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland relies on his chin more than anything. Whereas Ian Garry, if he eats a shot like MVP was hitting Kevin Holland, that fight's over. I don't think he takes those shots. That spinning elbow specifically hit Kevin Holland so hard, I don't think Ian Garry can ever take that shot. That would be a fun fight, especially in England. Put that on the 304 card. We gotta stack that one because 302 and 303, not looking too great. In 304 right now, you got Leon and Belal, Aspinall versus Blades, Arnold Allen versus Giga. Those are 3 very good fights. Makhachev versus Cap. That's a decent fight. Bobby Green versus Paddy Pimblett. That's a good one. Molly McCann, of course, you got to have her on there. Colin LaFrenne, you got to have him there too. Nathaniel Wood versus Daniel Pineda. Okay, decent fight. I mean, they could benefit tremendously with Ian Garry versus MVP. Now, for anybody from the UK or Ireland, what would a fight between those two kind of guys look like? You know, because Ian Garry's from Ireland, MVP is from UK. I know there's some countries that have had like disputes historically, and You do not want to put them up against each other like Albania and Serbia. You never put them against each other in any sporting event. Would it be a big thing for Ireland and the UK? Would it garner a lot of attention? But what I will say so far is 304 is looking much better than 303 and 302. In other news, we have Patchy Mix. For anybody that doesn't know Patchy Mix, he's the Bellator Bantamweight champion. And yes, over there in the PFL, they're still holding the belts of Bellator, and they're still having their events. So technically, Patchy Mix is still the champ. He just defended it. He's on a crazy good streak right now. He defeated Kyoji Horiguchi, Magomed Magomedov twice, the guy that beat Petr Yan and then lost to him, Sergio Pettis, Rafian Stotts. He's got some good wins there, man. And he says that he is the best bantamweight in the world, even when you count UFC fighters. And he's kind of like complaining about not getting the respect that Sean O'Malley gets. You're the Bellator champ. Your competition is impressive for the PFL and Bellator, but it doesn't rival like beating Merab Dvalishvili or Petr Yan, Aljamain Sterling, etc. Like, this is a deeper pool of competition that Sean O'Malley's going up against. Now, to be fair, O'Malley hasn't fought a lot of them. He fought Aljamain and Petr Yan. Chito, I guess you could say, rivals some of the guys that Patchy Mix has beaten. I love Chito. He's one of my favorite bantamweights, but it's the truth, you know. He doesn't stack up to the best of the best at 135 right now. Unless he makes the adjustment and gets aggressive again and pressures his opponents and stops sitting there for openings like he always does, that slow-paced style that he has hurts him so badly. So O'Malley also has a lot of work to do at 135. If he beats Merab, that's going to be huge for him. But I would say that Patchy Mix is one of the best bantamweights. If you made a global ranking system, Patchy Mix is 100% in the top 5 right now. O'Malley's the champ. After, you could bring like Merab as number 1, Sandhagen's probably number 2, and then I'd probably say Patchy Mix is number 3, because number 3 right now is Petr Yan, and then number 4 is Chito. And I think right now, because of their recent wins and losses, I think Patchy would be number 3, with Petr Yan right behind him and then Chito behind that. The thing that goes against Patchy Mix's competition is that 2 of the best guys he beat were flyweights, or former flyweights, Sergio Pettis and Kyoji Horiguchi. But that's an interesting thing to think about, because, you know, forever, even back in like 2010, we would look at guys outside the UFC and put like a global ranking on who is actually the best in the world. Right now, we only look at the UFC rankings, but there are really good guys outside of it. And I think it would change things up if we look at it that way. Like when Strikeforce was around, we all knew Jacare, Jake Shields, Gegard Mousasi, etc. Like all those guys in Strikeforce, we knew they were some of the best in the world. So we wouldn't just look at the UFC for the best fighters. Right now, that seems like what we're doing. But when you got guys like Patchy Mix, you got guys like Demetrious Johnson and One, and any other organization with really good fighters, it does change up the landscape of these divisions in terms of when you're thinking of who's the best. Because I'd argue Demetrious is still probably, well, I mean, technically he's 135 right now, but if he was in the UFC, he'd be 125. You could say Demetrious is still the best at 125. I don't know if that's a hot take, but who would you guys say would win? Alexander Pantoja or Demetrious Johnson right now? That's a tough fight to think about, man. Demetrious is still very, very good. He's fighting guys way bigger than he is. And speaking of a blast in the past with those 2010 rankings, I think they used to be on like Bleacher Report and stuff. Anderson and Chael Sonnen are back at it. They're going to be having a boxing match. Why would Chael accept a boxing match when he can't wrestle? He can't shoot takedowns. He can't try to ground and pound him. The stuff that he was known for. It's a money fight for him. And it's, hey, another opportunity for Silva to beat him down. No, but they seem more cool these days. There's going to be a lot of trash talk again. That's going to be the highlight of this entire thing. Vintage Chael Sonnen on the mic makes a comeback. Still to this day, my favorite story from Chael Sonnen was when he was talking about the Nogueira brothers and the bus. You guys know that story? He said he saw the Nogueira brothers land in America. They saw a bus. They whipped out a carrot and they tried to feed the carrot to the bus. Bro, that's so messed up. He went crazy on the Brazilians. Talking to how Vanderlei Silva used to play in the mud. Well, he had the latest video game and stuff. Like, dude, he went unhinged on the Brazilians. Dude, remember when he told Tito about his ex-wife? Tito made fun of him because the best thing about Chael is his mouth. And then Chael said the best thing about your ex-wife was her mouth. Crazy, bro. Tito was fuming when he heard that. Bro was giving himself more CTE. I just saw the video of Tito when he's talking on the mic inside the cage and he throws the mic after, like in some kind of drop the mic moment, and he threw the mic at his own head. I'm trying not to laugh. Chael was a savage, man. I hope we see that in the press conference with him and Silva, but he's gonna get massacred out there. He's got no chance in a boxing match with Silva, even at their age. In fact, I would think Silva has aged better than he has, Silva's aged better than most fighters ever. I mean, did we not see what he did to Tito? Speaking of Tito, he turned his brain to mush instantly when they fought. I can imagine something like that happens to Chael, but Chael's a smart guy, so he might drop to a knee if he gets hurt, pretty much knowing when he's done. And speaking of boxing, Oleksandr Usyk is not going to be the, I guess, undisputed champion anymore because his IBF championship, one of the 1,000 belts that he has, well, that belt is going to get stripped from him because he has not fought Filip Hrgovic yet. Filip Hrgovic is supposed to have a mandatory title shot for the IBF championship. Usyk had other guys to fight like Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, but because he wasn't able to fight everybody at once, when you have 1,000 belts, you also have 1,000 mandatory title contenders to go up against. One of them has to be stripped from him. That sport is such a joke with how it's structured. The fighters are the best thing about it. Everything else is a disgrace. All the belts, the judges, even the way they broadcast the fights. It takes a year before we go from one fight to the other. We can go to sleep, wake up, take a shower, go for a walk, go to work, come back, work out, take another shower, do another line, plow your girlfriend before the next fight starts. Oleksandr Usyk is the champion. He is the guy. I don't care who else has a belt. I don't care if the next guy has the ABC belt. That guy has the XYZ belt. Usyk is the guy to beat. All the other fighters are not the real champs. That's how I see it. I don't care about the IBF and all this other stuff. Usyk is the undisputed champion. He has the title. Every other champion is a pretender. Not saying they're a bad fighter or anything, but they're not the actual champion. This is actually stemming historically. There used to be kings, and then other people would step up claiming they're the heir to the throne when they actually weren't. These people were actually called pretenders. A historical fun fact. We actually talked about one. I think his name was Peter the Pretender, who stepped up to become the king of Moldavia when there was another guy, Steven, who was supposed to be the real king. Well, that's essentially what's happening here in boxing. We have the real champ. The title's going to get stripped from him and given to Hrgovic, who is a good boxer. Nothing against him. He's just fighting. He wants to go up against the champ. I don't blame him. It's just the way that the boxing sport is structured that's all messed up. And the crazy thing about all this is Fury has a mandatory rematch with Usyk. Bro could even fight Hrgovic if he wanted to. Or, I mean, he could. He could fight Hrgovic, but then he doesn't give Tyson Fury his immediate rematch, unless Fury just waits it out. But I don't know if there's like a time on the contract of when Usyk would have to fight him. I don't know if it's an immediate rematch or any of that stuff. It's such a big mess. And with that, let's go right to the questions. And we're going to start with Mike Griffith. We know Conor is fighting Chandler on June 29, but why haven't we seen more fight announcements for that card? All we got is the Jamal Hill fight and nothing more, and we're only a month and a few days from June 29. Is there any update on that? And who would you put on the main card if you were Dana? So I kind of covered this. I would try to get the Ian Garry and Colby Covington fight. They could have the Shavkat and JDM fight, but Shavkat is saying that he wants to fight like in August or September or something like that. I don't know the reason why he wants to wait out so long, but if they could put on Charles Oliveira versus Mateusz Gamrot on that card, that'd be big. Henry Cejudo versus Rob Font, if they could put that one together over there. Those are a few fights they can possibly make. They're with a Troy Hartung. Considering that Steve Erceg just had an excellent performance against Pantoja, are there any other fighters ranked outside the top 5 in each division that might have a solid chance of dethroning the current champion if they were to fight each other next? 3 that come to mind are Hamzat, number 10, versus Dricus, Umar, number 10, versus O'Malley, and Diego Lopez, number 14, versus Topuria. I can see Umar being a good pick against O'Malley compared to the other divisions. Diego Lopez is not a bad pick, even though I don't think he would beat Topuria right now. Possibly in the future, though. What are we thinking about Ian Garry versus Leon Edwards? Stylistically, that's a good matchup. I don't know if he beats Leon, but he would put up a good fight against him. For the middleweight division, I would say Nasruddin Imavov would be a tough fight for Dricus stylistically. Imavov would never let him off the hook for any opening he gives him, especially Imavov now. A couple years ago, probably would let him off the hook, but now it's a different story, man. He's getting so much better at capitalizing on these openings. I would say he has a better shot at beating Dricus than Hamzat. Michel Pereira could potentially put up a decent fight against Dricus. That would be a wild one, but I just don't know if they would beat him. Dricus is so well-rounded. He adapts pretty well, has 5-round cardio, strong and very powerful. But those guys would put up interesting fights for their rankings. There's not a lot of fighters outside the top 5 that could beat the champs, but those are some that could put up good fights against the champions. They're with the Nano Peach. Hey Weasel, hope you had a good weekend. With Robelis' loss, what's next for him? What's next for Lewis? Should the UFC strip John? Val versus Grasso 3. I think Val will get it done like she did in the second one. What do you think? Mix versus Sean. An early breakdown of the UK card. Okay, so I think Derrick Lewis should fight the loser of Jalton Almeida and Alexander Romanov. Well, actually, he doesn't like to fight those kind of guys. Wait, that would be a bad idea. We don't want to see Lewis go up against grapplers, actually. He could kill Marcin Tybura again, but Cyril Gane's probably going to fight him in France and get a title shot off that. Let's do Derrick Lewis versus Rosenstrike. That's a fight that hasn't happened, and Lewis has fought almost everybody else. It's crazy. I'm looking at the rankings. So many top 15 fighters Derrick Lewis has already fought. He fought Cyril Gane. He fought Sergey Pavlovich. He fought Curtis Blades, Alexander Volkov, Jelton Almeida, Marcin Tybura, Sergey Spivak, Tai Tuivasa, Marcos Rogério de Lima, and Rodrigo Nascimento. He has fought almost everybody in the top 15. Damn, this division sucks. So I guess him fight Rosenstrike. Should the UFC strip Jones? I think so, for the integrity of the heavyweight division, but in a business sense, probably not. And Val versus Grasso, I think Grasso's going to get her. Val's only getting older. Mix versus Sean. Mix has a very good style to fight Sean O'Malley. He's a good grappler, competent striker, not really good at it, but at least understands distance and all that stuff at a basic level. So it could potentially be like another Aljamain Sterling kind of an opponent for Sean O'Malley here. Could be a tough one for both fighters. And then early breakdown for the UK card, I kind of went over that, so I will make an official video for it when more fights are announced. Then we go to Mac Neilio. Hey Weasel, greetings from Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm curious if you have an opinion on if the new gloves will have any meaningful effect on the outcome of the first main event they will be used in, Dustin versus Islam. Will the new gloves give any glaring advantage one way or another to the grappler or the striker? Maybe it'll be more difficult for the opponent to hold on to the other guy's glove, for an example, with Charles versus Dustin, or maybe it'll make it harder to hold onto the wrist when fighting off the choke. We'll love to hear your thoughts. Cheers. Yes, so the description of the gloves, it's going to make it harder to grab onto them, finger the inside of it, and, gripping on. And this can go for both different kind of fighters. It could go for the grappler, it could go for the striker on the ground. It just depends on what's happening here, because in certain positions, the striker who doesn't want to be on the ground and trying to cheat his way out of it, he could grab the inside of the glove, preventing the grappler from getting any kind of wrist control or reaching around or getting a body lock or an underhook or whatever. You could kind of control where their arm is going if you're gripping on the inside of it. But it can go the other way around. For instance, that Charles Oliveira and Dustin Poirier example. When Charles was getting him in an omoplata, he grabbed on the inside of the glove of Dustin so he couldn't pull out of it, and that forced Dustin to flip over. I think it's going to hurt the striker on the ground more than the grappler, as I think they'd be more willing to cheat their way out of positions than the grappler cheating while they have something dominant on top of them, right? If they're on the ground, they're kind of in the grappler's world, so they have more control of what's happening. And I see it less likely than the striker to cheat in those kind of circumstances. That doesn't mean they don't cheat. There's definitely some that do, but it's less likely, a less probability of them doing it, I think, off the top of my head. I actually don't know if there's any stats on that. Now, they're saying they're removing the outside stitches of the glove so it won't cut the opponent open if they punch him, like when Alexander Gustafsson punched at John Jones and cut him open, or when Randy Couture was fighting Vitor Belfort and his eyelid got cut. Now, I think this would hurt more of the striker, because of course he's going to be wanting to stay on the feet and throw more punches and all that stuff against a grappler, but it's usually not a purposeful thing. You're throwing a punch, the wrestler in this instance would dip his head to his side, slip the punch, but the stitches still catch them and cut them open. Apparently that's not something that's going to happen anymore, which is a good thing. And of course, the biggest thing about the gloves is that they're going to reduce the number of eye pokes, because the gloves are going to be naturally bent inward instead of naturally forcing the hand to open. That's the biggest thing. Now, other than the eye poke itself, I don't think it really is going to change the game too much, when the real issues of the sport, other than eye poking, are like grounded opponent rules, downward elbows, and the judging criteria. Those are the main things now for them to focus on fixing. Then we go to the public questions. We're going to start with Liam JP Lindsay. One major criticism in MMA at the moment is the state of journalism, specifically questions at press conferences, pre- and post-fight interviews. As someone who's getting into MMA journalism and aspiring to be at these events one day, what are the types of questions you like to be asked? And what direction do you want journalism and MMA to go in? Keep up the great content. Thanks, brother. Thank you so much, man. And please save MMA journalism. It needs to change. These guys are not asking any interesting questions. They're all softballs. They're things no one cares about. How do you feel for this fight? Did you train? Did you eat for the fight? Do you think you're going to win? Should I bet on you? I've heard that before. Should I bet on you? Dana, how is Power Slap going? I hope you can fix it all. I hope you're the savior of MMA journalism. We need better journalists. Now, kind of questions that you could potentially ask are like things about performances, like a lot more specific stuff about fights, but don't make them too nerdy where most people aren't really going to care. Like, for an example, if a fighter has been working on their left hook and you're noticing it throughout their fights, they're just getting much better at it, you can ask them something like, we see that you're getting better at this left hook, and you can expect your opponent is going to address this in the fight somehow. What do you think they're going to do, and how would you answer that? So you can have like technical questions in that way and not get too in depth where people are just like, what is this guy talking about? If there's a controversial thing going on with the fighter and the fans want to hear him talk about it, ask him about that. For some reason, the journalists refuse to do so. The journalists are so afraid of getting on the fighter's bad side. I understand that perspective because it's part of their job. They don't want to get axed from interviewing certain fighters, and some fighters are like that. If they don't like the way you ask questions, if they think you're coming off negatively against them, and that negativity might just be journalism. Journalism should be objective, not taken with subjectivity. Maybe then the journalist won't ask them these kind of questions. I think that's what's really going on with that. But we want real journalism. We want real questions about the stuff that the fans care about. I swear, why hasn't anybody asked Rose Namajunas on why Pat Barry is still cornering her? Maybe not asking like that, but like frame it in this kind of way. There's a lot of criticism about Pat Barry in your corner, giving you very questionable advice that even seems to be opposite of what Trevor Whitman wants you to do. Why did you take out Trevor Whitman from your corner instead of Pat Barry? What was the decision there? If you want to be very lukewarm with the question. Now, if you want to get really crazy, you can start asking them about, wait, what did Pat Barry mean by love at first sight? Can you imagine if a journalist actually asked Rose or Pat Barry that question? They'd be everyone's favorite journalist. Or you can ask Aljamain Sterling, when you're going down on all fours, is part of the game plan to actually cheat the system by being a grounded opponent so your guy can't kick you or knee you in the face or whatever it is? And do you think that rule should change? What do you think about changing that rule? Do you think it's a natural defensive position to be in a fight? You can go into technical stuff like that as well. And those are kind of questions or topics that people want to hear that fighter talk about. It's usually specific to them, but these days a lot of questions are very broad that could be asked to anybody, and all the specific questions are things nobody cares about. And if it's the funny stuff, I don't know how professional it would be for the job, but imagine someone was asking Adesanya about the dog stuff, or John Jones when he comes back about the comedy club. What was going on there? That's more gossip stuff or whatever, but it's stuff that fans want to hear about. There are fans of the sport, not just about fighting, and that's it. I just don't know if journalists want to take that angle with their questions. A lot of fans would probably appreciate the entertainment level of it. And reply ask, I want to add, Weasel, why aren't you at these press events? You clearly belong there. I don't have the journalist thing. Don't you need the credentials or whatever? If I could at one event, I would definitely like to ask some questions to these fighters in a press conference though. Can you imagine me and a bunch of other YouTubers or other content creators get Luke Thomas back in there to ask John Jones some questions? Because Jones definitely does not like Luke Thomas at all. I would have a blast with it. That would be really fun. I would ask him real questions, stuff that people want to know that are not softballs and just catering and kissing their asses and stuff. I wouldn't ask those kind of questions. I would not be disrespectful or negative, but I would ask questions that people want to hear. Do some real journalism, But shout out to you, man. Hopefully you get it done. Hopefully we see you in these press conferences asking some good questions. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. It's your job. If you feel like it puts you in jeopardy of losing opportunities and stuff, I guess I understand it. Then we go to the worst box. Hey, Weasel. Bedtime MMA said Belal Muhammad would beat Charles Oliveira by drowning him, outstriking him for 5 rounds with 0 head movement, landing vicious body kicks and snuffing all his takedowns and grappling attempts, plus out-wrestling him. Maybe even fluke injure him. 50-45 win. You said before that Charles beats Belal, so I want your take on this. Great content, man. Keep it up. Thank you so much, man. And I do know Bedtime. I like Bedtime a lot. I'm part of the Bedtime crew, but Belal Muhammad would lose. But no, I don't think Belal beats him. I would pick Charles Oliveira. It would be a pretty interesting fight. Belal has gotten better, even though everybody clowns on him. If he couldn't finish Gilbert Burns, who had one arm, who's older, I don't think he would finish Charles Oliveira either. And anytime Belal takes him to the ground, it'd be very, very difficult for him to do anything on Charles on the ground, I think. Charles could potentially submit him. He could potentially knock him out on the feet. I would think he hits harder. He's got a little bit of a reach advantage on Belal. Belal is quite hittable when he's not able to use his wrestling and striking in sequence. But I think this is a joke because he said vicious body kicks. Drowning Charles, I could see him trying to do that and going into the later rounds and, beating him that way. Outstriking him because Charles doesn't have head movement. I don't agree, but I can see that. I can see where you're going with that. Vicious body kicks, though, I don't know, man. He would out-wrestle Charles. He would stuff all the takedowns. He wouldn't stop all the grappling attempts, though. Interesting take, but no, I would say Charles beats Belal Muhammad. Thank you for the question from the Bedtime Crew. Then we go to exposing times. Who are some UFC fighters that don't get enough credit? Jose Aldo. You would think that's kind of crazy. Hardcore fans give Jose Aldo a lot of credit, but the casual fans and the commentators and the big time personalities like Joe Rogan, they don't give him enough credit at all. Like, they don't even view him as like one of the best fighters. They think Max Holloway's above him. They think Volkanovski's above him. Some of them even think Conor McGregor is above him. He's the greatest featherweight of all time. He is, in my opinion, top 5 greatest fighters ever. He's one of the best skilled fighters we've ever seen in the sport. GSP is another one. How many champions were greater than GSP? Tyron Woodley, Kamaru Usman. Soon enough, Leon Edwards is going to be regarded greater than GSP after like 2 more title defenses. So in that aspect, I would say GSP and Jose Aldo aren't given enough credit from like the mainstream audience and the mainstream personalities of the sport. I would say Daniel Cormier is another fighter that doesn't get enough credit for what he did in fighting. If it wasn't for John Jones and Stipe Miocic, he could go down as one of the greatest fighters of all time. But he had to fight the greatest light heavyweight and heavyweight, and that's the only reason people don't look at him in terms of like this greatness. You know what I'm saying? Like, anytime you bring up Daniel Cormier and his accomplishments, what is always the replies? But John Jones though, but Stipe though. It's like, man, if we could look at just what DC did positively in his career, very few were able to do what he did. I would say RDA is another one. People only know him for fighting everybody, but that's not just it. You know, he's one of the greatest lightweights of all time. The quality of opponents that he beat at lightweight is crazy. I mean, he beat Benson Henderson in his prime, knocked him out in the first round before anybody else was able to do that. He dominated Anthony Pettis from bell to bell, destroyed Donald Cerrone in about a minute, beat Nate Diaz, beat Donald Cerrone before. RDA was special, man. Goes up to 170, fights everybody. The real BMF of MMA. But let's see, what do you guys think here? There's some replies. Jake Shields, yeah, Jake Shields, definitely. But for his work after the UFC against Tim Pool. Okay, sure. But before the UFC as well, Jake Shields was legit. You know, he was regarded as one of the best welterweights on the planet. When you go back and look at Jake Shields' career, it's like unfathomable, the guys that he beat. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, how did he beat Dan Henderson? How did he beat Robbie Lawler? How did he beat Tyron Woodley and Damian Maia and Carlos Condit? How did he go on a 15-fight win streak before fighting GSP? How did no one knock this guy out? If you go by accomplishments, Jake Shields is one of the most accomplished fighters GSP has ever fought. Justin Kennedy says Martin Kampman. Not only does his last name more or less mean fight man, he had a fun fight style to watch and anything could happen. Yeah, Martin Kampman was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie though, Johnny Hendricks sending him into oblivion completely destroyed anybody's image on Martin Kampman. He's a very forgotten fighter. Yeah, I agree with that. Also, TJ Grant. TJ Grant is one of the most forgotten fighters. Like, he was on cusp of fighting for the title, and he was going to potentially give Benson Henderson a run for his money. At least that's what some people thought at the time. He was the dark horse that rose up to fight for a belt, but concussions ended his career. Kenny Stamper says, RDA, that dude fought Murderer's Row for over a decade now. Yeah, man, RDA is a legend. The underpaid ones. Belal. Yeah, I guess Belal is kind of low-key. Yeah, I do agree with that. He is kind of underappreciated. Not in terms of excitement. People are going to think who's exciting and who's not, and there's no changing that. But in terms of how good he is, Belal is really better than we give him credit. Paddy Pimblett? No, but not Paddy Pimblett. No. He was overhyped. A lot of people gave him way too much credit before. Kevin Lee. Made me depressed, man. Then we go to another one by exposing times. Could the average high school boy wrestler beat the average women's MMA UFC fighter in a wrestling match? Same weight class, and compare wrestling skills of high school boys to women's MMA fighters in the UFC. I don't know, man. When I was in high school, I hit puberty pretty quickly. So, like, I was already 5'11" by 8th grade. And there were other guys who were, like, still 5'7", could barely do push-ups. So I don't know about the average high school wrestler, but I would say varsity high school wrestlers would destroy women MMA fighters. A wrestler competing at regionals would probably throw Amanda Nunes on her head. The strength difference between a high school wrestler and even a women's MMA fighter is very large. They go to another one by The Worst Box. Silva vs. Sonnen 3 for boxing just got announced for Sao Paulo, Brazil. Thoughts on the matchup? They shouldn't be doing this, honestly. Silva has been competing and Chael wasn't. I did not know what's happening in Brazil. Bro's about to be fighting on the streets on the way to the arena. But what did Chael say? What did the GOAT say before? 1-on-1, 2-on-1, or 5-on-1? I'm going to make them all need 9-1-1. Chael's about to take on an army of Brazilians and then flatline Anderson Silva in the ring, fresh off the couch with no boxing training. Chael's going to get destroyed. He's going to get destroyed, man. Especially if he starts saying some crazy stuff out there, they're gonna have to really get some security for Chael. You remember that one time in Brazil where that fan grabbed Matt Brown's head and Matt Brown like rocked his shit? That was crazy. Pardon my language, I'm sorry. But like the Brazilian fans sometimes get a bit wild and would even try to touch the fighters. They're going to a curse talk. If the rumors are true and Izzy does end up fighting DDP, is it a sign of the old days where undeserved stars can get a title shot just because of their name value / history? Yeah, and I don't think that's ever gone away. I mean, John Jones is fighting Stipe Miocic. Conor McGregor's probably going to get a title fight if he beats Michael Chandler. It's always been a thing in prize fighting. As unfortunate as it is for the integrity of the sport and the divisions, if you're big enough of a star and you can sell the fight, you can get title shots off of that. And that's always been a thing. And nice to be on board for a lot of it until like what's happening this year with John Jones fighting Stipe and Adesanya fighting DDP, Islam and Leon now saying they're both going to fight Conor. A lot of us are over all of that. Let's get order back in these divisions. Let's get contenders to fight the champions, because all the champions at this point are calling out fighters that just don't make sense for them to fight. They would go to USA Patriot Crickets. John Jones gay? I answered that in the last episode, but again, the question is not if he is, it's how much. He is very, very aggressively gay. Like, why was he touching that guy like that? I don't understand in public. So weird. And telling everybody he's gonna finger them. Then we'll go to Arcanum. What timeline should Dana look at for terminating all the women's divisions from the sport? He should start with 135. Wait, does 145 still exist? If it still does, take away 145 first, then 135 the day after. If 125 doesn't get better in the next year, take away that one. Keep 115 though. We can keep 115. If we're going to keep heavyweight, we're going to be keeping 115. Wait, do you think heavyweight is better than the women's 125 pound division? No, I'm kidding. They're not going to take away any of the women's division. The only one I don't really find much entertainment out of is 135. There are some good 125 fights. There's a lot of good 115 fights. 135 is just a wasteland. It's legitimately the worst division in the UFC. It's worse than heavyweight. Heavyweight has John Jones and Tom Aspinall and Sergey Pavlovich. Like, just those three are better than the entire women's 135 pound division, at least to watch. Like, let me look at the 135 pound rankings. Raquel Pennington is the champion, man. Like, okay, nothing against them specifically, but just as a fan who wants fun fights to watch, Pennington being the champ is not great. Pena's not fun, in my opinion. Caitlin Vieira is not fun. Maya Bueno Silva, she's got something going. I mean, she has some interesting grappling and stuff like that, but she gasses out way too quickly. Kayla Harrison is pretty cool, though. Is she on supplements? Regardless, I still think she's fun. If she's going to be destroying fighters like how she just beat Holly Holm, I'm all in. Never mind, keep 135 just to see Kayla Harrison run through everybody. Irina Aldana's got interesting boxing, fun sometimes to watch. Holly Holm, why is she not retired yet? It's like Andrei Arlovski. It's just that the division is so much worse than heavyweight that she can actually be in the top 10 where Arlovski can't. She's reverted herself into a clinched fighter. She was way better like 8 years ago in her prime. Macy Chiasson, sometimes there's some interesting fights she's got. Misha Tate, who's not a fan of Misha Tate. Killer Rosa, Norma Dumont, okay, definitely keep the division. We got Norma Dumont in there too. Penny Kianzad is decent. Yana Santos, don't really care. Julia Avila, she's alright. Chelsea Chandler, don't really care. Jermaine Duranamy, I like her striking style, but she's very old now. Yeah, that division is definitely worse than heavyweight. Women's flyweight, though, with Grasso, Shevchenko, Menem Furat, Erin Blanchfield, Macy Barber, Jessica Andrade, Rose, Caitlin Sermonara, Natalia Silva, I really like Natalia Silva, Amanda Ribas, she's fun, Vivian Arajo, she's pretty good, Tracy Cortez, she's cool, Corrine Silva, Ariana De Silva, Casey O'Neill, Jasmine Jazadavidikas. It might be better than heavyweight. It's got a better top 15, but like number 1 to number 5, heavyweight is probably better. Women's 115 though. Zhang Weili's the champ. I think she's the best woman fighter on the planet. She's number 2 pound for pound, but I think she should be number 1. I understand Grasso, who was a 115er, she went up to 125 and got the belt. That is the definition of pound for pound, but I think Zhang Weili is the best woman fighter. You have Tatiana Suarez, number 1. That's a monster right there. Yang Xiaonan, good fighter. Amanda Lemos, good fighter, has defensive holes in her wrestling. Jessica Andrade, she's actually higher up on 115 than 125. Does that mean that 125 is better? Verna, she's decent. Marina Rodriguez, she's fun. Mackenzie Dern, potential talent, but needs to work on her stand-up and her wrestling. Amanda Ribas, number 8. Yeah, I guess 125 is probably better than 115. They both have Jessica Andrade and Amanda Ribas ranked. And both Jessica Andrade and Amanda Ribas are higher at 115 in the rankings than 125. Does that just confirm that 125 is better? Angela Hill, Lupi Godinez, Tabitha Ritchie, these are all pretty good fighters. Luana Pinheiro, Jasmine Lucindo, Michelle Watterson, and Jillian Robertson. I don't know about Watterson. I wouldn't consider her like that great, but the other fighters are pretty decent. I don't know though. I think strawweight is better than flyweight slightly if you look at the whole top 15, but I wouldn't have too much of an argument if you said flyweight was better. They're both better than heavyweight. Look at the Who's House football. Fantasy matchups, everyone in their prime. Rose versus Valentina. I'm going to go with Valentina. I don't like Rose at 125. Adesanya versus Usman. I'll go with Adesanya, but tough fight. That's a close one. Daniel Cormier versus Alex Pereira. 100% going DC. Bas Rutten versus Randy Couture. I'm going to go with Randy. Islam Makhachev versus Brock Lesnar. Brock smashes him. Alexa Grasso versus Ronda Rousey. I'm going to go with Alexa Grasso. Max Holloway versus Nate Diaz. In their prime is a tough one. I'll go with Max, but that's not an easy one. I think a lot of people would think that Holloway would destroy Nate Diaz and run right through him. I don't know though, man. The Nate Diaz that fought Michael Johnson or Conor McGregor is a tough one for Max Holloway to fight in my opinion, but I think Max would outpoint him. He might even win every round. But some of those are going to be very close, I would say. So I guess maybe not a close fight on the scorecards, but a more competitive fight than we'd probably imagine. Aljamain Sterling versus Dominick Cruz. I'm going to go with Dominick Cruz, but that's a good one. That's a tough fight to call. John Jones versus Anderson Silva. 100% going John Jones. Frankie Edgar versus TJ Dillashaw. I'll go with TJ, but man, that's like a 50-50 fight. Then we're going to feed me. How would you matchmake the UFC welterweight division? Leon versus Belal. I would keep Kamaru at 185. I wouldn't keep him at 170. Shavkat versus Jagdella. Colby versus Ian Garry. Gilbert Burns versus Michael Venom Page, Sean Brady versus Joaquin Buckley, Wonderboy versus Neil Magny, Jeff Neal versus Renat, or the winner of Zaleski versus Rennie Brown. Vicente Luque should retire, and Kevin Holland, I don't know what he's doing. He's up at middleweight again. Then we'll go to Ellen Combs. Dear Wise Weasel, that's Lord Weasel, but I'll take Wise. I was honestly very disappointed by Rubella's disband getting dominated by a low-level blob. What do you think has been the most disappointing hype train derailment? Thanks for the great content. No, thank you for the question, man. Yeah, he lost to one of the low-level blobs. He didn't even get to fight the king of the blobs. He was supposed to be the hunter, and he got hunted by blobs, man. It's crazy. But the most disappointing hype train derailment, Khalil Rountree losing to tainted supplements, John Jones losing to cocaine and the PD, Tito Ortiz losing to his own brain, Dominick Cruz losing to everyday activities, Jones' wife losing to Jones, Pat Barry losing to the age of consent, Peter Yan losing to his own coaches, Tony Ferguson losing to a wire, Ronda Rousey losing to stairs, Paulo Costa losing to alcohol, German Shepherd losing to Adesanya, Volk losing to his ambitions, Entertainment losing to Bilal Muhammad. No, I'm just kidding. There's your base take of today. Some of those I'm kidding. Some of those are true. But no, the most disappointing hype train derailments, Rubella's is definitely one of the biggest ones. Like, we were all for sure thinking he was going to beat Waldo Cortez Acosta. But I would say Darren Till was another big one. At least he lost to the champ. Right? Gokhan Saki losing to Khalil Rountree. Aaron Pico losing to Henry Corrales. That one was wild, dude. Nobody expected that. Giga Shikaze getting annihilated by Kelvin Cater. And I would say the biggest of all of them was Johnny Walker losing to Corey Anderson. We were literally contemplating that he could fight John Jones. And funny enough, he probably would have gave him some kind of challenge. Dominic Reyes did. Thiago Santos did. But those guys are better than Johnny Walker, so maybe not. But that was a huge hype train derailment. And then we go to Snow. Hey Weasel, have you seen the John Jones theory? And if you have, what are your thoughts on it? Also, do you bet? And if you do, have you made money out of it? Love the videos, man. Without a doubt, the highest quality content out there. Keep going and ignore the haters. Thank you so much, man. No, I don't know the John Jones theory unless you're talking about his zestiness. And do I bet? Yes. Not all the time. I only bet on fights that I'm confident in. And I've made more money than I've lost. I did hit that big parlay like I mentioned before. I cashed out though before Pantoja won. I was too scared. I was literally thinking that Steve Erceg was going to win like a week before the fight, and I just cashed it out. I'm like, yo, I'm not going to risk it. But then he won. The biggest I've ever hit were on parlays, of course. The UK one where Tom Aspinall, I think where he fought Volkov. I had like an 11 fight parlay, or it was either 10 or 11 fight parlay, and I won on that. I think I only put like $20 though. That's usually what I do with parlays. I only put like, I don't bet a lot of money, but I do try to use my knowledge on the sport to predict the fights, as unpredictable as this sport is. But the single best like bet I've ever made was on Alex Caceres beating Sung Woo Choi on that live bet. After the first round, he was like a plus, I think 1100 or something like that. I put a little bit of money on him and he won. That was like my biggest single bet, but I've had quite a few losses in bets as well. Then we go to Javier Raiza. How does the fight between Colby and Belal play out? The Colby that fought Leon Edwards, I would say that Belal would beat him in a very boring decision win. The Colby that fought Usman, though, I would say beats Belal in a more exciting fight. Then with the Tyrone Winter, how do you think a highly trained Navy SEAL would do against a UFC champion in a street fight, no weapons? With no weapons, he's not beating the UFC fighter, especially a champion. If you bring weapons into it, then of course the Navy SEAL will definitely win. But even given any environment, whatever place they have the fight at, I would always go with the UFC champion in a no weapons kind of fight. Then with the Naman Jamil, do you think Islam is taking Dustin seriously? It seems like he's dismissing Dustin's chances due to him being 0-2 in title fights and saying he's a bad matchup for him. Ariel brought this point up in his interview with Dustin, and it seemed to rattle Dustin, or could this be the most dangerous Dustin considering it's his last chance at a title shot? It's not smart if Islam is overlooking him. Dustin's a very dangerous fighter no matter what state he's in at this point. He's always going to be dangerous. Like Islam is already talking about what's next. You know, he did talk about Conor McGregor. He did talk about going up to 170 and fighting Leon. He's a smart guy. I hope he's like grounded enough to take this Dustin fight seriously. If he does, I see him beating Dustin, but if he's dismissing Dustin, he could get knocked out. When you're in the top like 5 of the lightweight division, any mistake can cost the entire fight. These guys are some of the highest skilled fighters in the UFC. They cannot make any mistakes against each other. And we'll go to one more question by Gurman Klar. Dustin Poirier versus Tony Ferguson, both in their prime, who wins? Personally, I've always felt that Poirier would be a hard matchup for Tony, given his heavy boxing style and considering Ferguson's defense was always suspect. Yeah, I'd also go with Dustin, but I don't think either fighter comes out of that unscathed. Dustin's probably going to get cut up. Tony's going to get dropped. Fight probably goes to a 5-round decision, one of the greatest fights ever, but I think Dustin wins. Tony keeps his chin up, and Dustin is great at following up his shots precisely, so maybe he misses like the initial shot when Tony's dipping and turning around to get away, but Dustin will be landing with those follow-up shots as Tony has his eyes off of him. You see that a lot from Tony Ferguson, where he's like literally turning his back to the opponent to get away, and you cannot do that against someone like Dustin. But that close range that Dustin likes to fight in will get him caught by some sharp elbows from Tony. I did have something on my mind. It ties in with history, so everybody knows I do have a history podcast. I'm almost done with the Champions of Christ series. We just got done with John Hunyadi. We got one more to go, who's the best of the bunch. But it's been in my head, and it's kind of bothering me. History's in the media right now, especially with that game Assassin's Creed. I haven't played in a long time, so I don't have too much to talk about the game itself, but I know what it is about. And the historical thing about it is people are talking about the main character, Yasuke, who was a real person. But so many people talking about history don't understand it at all. It's crazy how so many people have opinions on this and just are completely off the mark with who Yasuke was and what did he do. Well, firstly, he was not a samurai. He did fight in battles. He had 2 battles he participated in. The Battle of Tenmonguzen and the Honoji incident where Nobunaga died. But that doesn't make him a samurai. You don't need to, be on the front lines of battle to be considered a samurai. In fact, you could just be a foot soldier. A samurai wasn't just someone who fought. It was a status, like a class in Japan at the time. If you were a samurai, you were the guy. And Yasuke was never a samurai. He was a retainer. He was a servant of Nobunaga. But that's not the important thing that I cared about as much, just, people confusing it all. I was like thinking, on Assassin's Creed part, what stopped them from using a real ninja for their character? The game is all about assassins, and the most popular type of assassin in media are ninjas, right? We finally get to Japan, right? They finally are developing a game in Japan and being very mindful on who their characters are going to be. And they don't even pick a real ninja. But they included another historical person who was real and changed his whole story. That's the only question I have. Why did they not use a real ninja, but instead they used Yasuke? And they used, fine, a fictional ninja on the side, but at least, you dropped the ball here. Where's Hattori Hanzo, right? Hattori Hanzo is the most famous ninja that's referenced everywhere whenever you see a ninja. Every single ninja from every movie, every TV show, comic book, video game, etc. are inspired by Hattori Hanzo. He was a real ninja, the most famous in history, and his life was insane. Assassinating people, one of the top generals under Tokugawa Ieyasu, who is one of Japan's greatest leaders in their entire history. Can you imagine if they turned the game that way? You get to play with Hanzo. You're assassinating different daimyos and leaders to get Ieyasu ahead, to become shogun of Japan. That would have been insane, but they completely dropped the ball, and I just don't understand why. One of the most badass people in history, and they don't even use him as a main character when they could have. It's the same time period too. I would imagine he's gonna be in the game, but to not be able to play with him is crazy. He was the leader of the Iga clan, but the funny thing about it is the girl character you can play with, she's from the Iga clan in their game, but you don't get to play with the leader of them. And that's the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Awesome questions. I'm gonna go listen to some Eminem. I don't know why I want to. Probably finish Shogun and make some steak. Medium or maybe well done. I know well done is like eating a tire, but I like well done. Medium rare is probably the best though, so I might go medium rare. I hope you guys are having an awesome one, and I'll see you guys in the next video.